Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Jaya Girivaradhari Jaya Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Jaya Girivaradhari Jaya Girivaradhari Jaya Yashoda Nandana Jaya Braja Janaranjana Jaya Yashoda Nandana Jaya Braja Janaranjana Jaya Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Kunja Vihari Jaya Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Radhe Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Radhe Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Nitai Gaura Haribo 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 Nitai Gaura Haribo Shri Radha Madhav ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaur Bhaktavinda ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. 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 Hare Krishna, welcome everyone. So today we'll be reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 2, entitled The Cosmic Manifestation, Text 27. So I will read the text, the verse. Na yatra shoko na jarana mrityor, na yatra shoko na jarana mrityor, nartir na chodvegarite kutasche, nartir na chodvegarite na kutasche, yachittatoda kripaya nidhim vidam, yachittatoda kripaya nidhim vidam, duranta dukkha prabhavanu darshanat, duranta dukkha prabhavanu darshanat. Na yatra shoko na jara na mrityor, na yatra shoko na jara na mrityu nartir na chodvegarite kutaschid nartir na chodvegarite kutaschid yachittatoda kripaya nidam vidam yachittatoda kripaya nidam vidam duranta dukkha prabhavanu darshanat duranta dukkha prabhavanu darshanat na yatra shoko na jara na mrityur na yatra shoko na jara na mrityur nartir na chodvegarite kutaschid nartir na chodvegarite kutaschid yachittatoda kripaya nidam vidam yachittatoda kripaya nidam vidam duranta dukkha prabhavanu darshanat duranta dukkha prabhavanu darshanat na never yatra there are shoka bereavement na nor jara old age na nor mrityu death na nor arti pains na nor cha also udvega anxieties rite save and accept kutaschid sometimes yat because of chit consciousness tata therefore adha compassion kripaya out of heartfelt sympathy an idam vidam of those who are ignorant of the process of devotional service duranta unsurpassable dukkha misery prabhava repeated birth and death anudarshanat by successive experience. Translation of Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. In that planet of Satyaloka, there is neither bereavement, nor old age, nor death. There is no pain of any kind, and therefore there are no anxieties, save that sometimes, due to consciousness, there is a feeling of compassion for those unaware of the process of devotional service, who are subjected to unsurpassable miseries in the material world. Please repeat. In that planet of Satyaloka, or I'll just repeat the translation again. In that planet of Satyaloka, there's neither bereavement, nor old age, nor death. There's no pain of any kind, and therefore there are no anxieties, save that sometimes, due to consciousness, there's a feeling of compassion for those unaware of the process of devotional service, who are subjected to unsurpassable miseries in the material world. Purport. Foolish men of materialistic temperament do not take advantage of successive authorized knowledge. The Vedic knowledge is authorized and is acquired not by experiment, but by authentic statements of the Vedic literatures, explained by bona fide authorities. Simply by becoming an academic scholar, one cannot understand the Vedic statements. One has to approach the real authority who has received the Vedic knowledge by disciplic succession, as clearly explained in the Bhagavad Gita 4.2. The Lord affirmed that the system of knowledge as explained in the Bhagavad Gita was explained to the sun god, and the knowledge descended by disciplic succession from the sun god to his son Manu, and from Manu to King Ikshvaku, the forefather of Lord Ramachandra. And thus the system of knowledge was explained down the line of great sages, one after another. But in due course of time, the authorized succession was broken, and therefore, just to re-establish the true spirit of the knowledge, the Lord again explained the same knowledge to Arjuna, who was a bona fide candidate for understanding due to his being a pure devotee of the Lord. Bhagavad Gita, as it was understood by Arjuna, is also explained. But there are many foolish men who do not follow in the footsteps of Arjuna in understanding the spirit of Bhagavad Gita. They create instead their own interpretations, which are as foolish as they themselves, and thereby only help to put a stumbling block on the path of real understanding, misdirecting the innocent followers who are less intelligent, or the Shudras. It is said that one should become a Brahmana before one can understand the Vedic statements. And this stricture is as important as the stricture that no one shall become a lawyer who has not qualified himself as a graduate. Such a stricture is not an impediment in the path of progress for anyone and everyone. But it is necessary for an unqualified understanding of a particular science. Vedic knowledge is misinterpreted by those who are not qualified Brahmanas. A qualified Brahmana is one who has undergone strict training under the guidance of a bona fide spiritual master. The Vedic wisdom guides us to understand our relation with the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna, and to act accordingly is in order to achieve the desired result of returning home back to Godhead. But materialistic men do not understand this. They want to make a plan to become happy in a place where there is no happiness. For false happiness, they try to reach other planets, either by Vedic rituals or by spacecraft. But they should know for certain that any amount of materialistic adjustment for becoming happy in a place which is meant for distress cannot benefit the misguided man, because after all, the whole universe, with all its paraphernalia, will come to an end after a certain period. Then all plans of materialistic happiness will automatically come to an end. The intelligent person therefore makes a plan to return home back to Godhead. Such an intelligent person surpasses all the pangs of material existence, like birth, death, disease, and old age. He is actually happy because he has no anxieties of material existence. But as a compassionate sympathizer, he feels unhappiness for the suffering materialistic men. And thus he occasionally comes before the materialistic men to teach them the necessity of going back to Godhead. All the bona fide acharyas preach this truth of returning home back to Godhead and warn men not to make a false plan for happiness in a place where happiness is only a myth. Once again, this last sentence, all the bona fide acharyas preach this truth of returning home back to Godhead and warn men not to make a false plan for happiness in a place where happiness is only a myth. Om Gyanam Timirandhasya Gyananjana Shlakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadam Mayam Dadati Swapadantika. Hare Krishna. Thank you everyone for coming this morning. Today we had daylight savings, so I think people are confused about the time, and it's a change of time. We've lost an hour. An hour of our day has gone forever. So this is actually a very beautiful verse. I'll once again read the translation to remind us. In that planet of Satyalok, there's neither bereavement, nor old age, nor death. There's no pain of any kind, and therefore there are no anxieties, save that sometimes, due to consciousness, there's a feeling of compassion for those unaware of the process of devotional service, who are subjected to the unsurpassable miseries in the material world. So here, this is a very powerful verse, a very amazing verse, where the Srimad Bhagavatam and Srila Prabhupada are describing are giving a description of the residents of Satyaloka. How the residents of Satyaloka, they are almost liberated. They are pretty much in a spiritual planet. Because why? Because everyone there is self-realized. So it's a material planet, but it's like a spiritual planet because of their consciousness. Everyone there is spiritually realized. And due to their realization, they're all sages. There's no misery there, as is being described in this verse of the Bhagavatam. There's no material miseries there. Here it's being said, there's no pain of any kind, and therefore there are no anxieties. There's no bereavement, there's no old age or death. It says there's no death. Na jara na mrityu. Na mrityu. No death is there either. So one would think, well, how is it possible? Satyaloka is the planet of Lord Brahma. It's a material planet. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, A Brahma Bhuvanar Loka. That all the planets in this material world, all the way up to Lord Brahma's planet, are places of mrityu. They're places of death. But here, the Bhagavatam is describing that in Satyalok, there's no death. So how is that possible? Because the residents of Satyaloka, pretty much all of them, they get liberated at the end of their life. So after leading their life, there is death, because in the Gita it said this is a temporary world. They all become annihilated. All the planets become annihilated. It gets destroyed. But because on account of them being liberated souls, their death is also their liberation. They're giving up their material bodies, also their liberation. Like Bhagavatam describes, when a great soul gives up his body, it is the simultaneous, like darkness and lightning at the same time. It is the simultaneous occurrence of liberation. And therefore there's no death for the pure devotee, or even for a devotee, anyone who is going back to Godhead, who is not staying in this material world. For them, this material world, when they die, that death is not death, it is liberation. It is not inauspicious, but rather it is auspicious, their passing. So for the devotees of the Lord, if a devotee gives up their life, if a devotee gives up their body, it is not an inauspicious occurrence, but rather it is a positive occurrence. It is an auspicious time, because it is the liberation of that devotee. It is them going back home, back to Godhead. So in Satyalok, there's no bereavement or old age or death, because everyone is getting liberated. There's no pain of any kind, and therefore there's no anxieties. There's no material miseries there. So what is this showing? It's showing that if there is full Krishna consciousness, if we lead our lives in full Krishna consciousness, then there's no pain, there's no suffering, there's no bereavement. There's no old age, and there's not even any death. Like the Bhagavatam, that famous verse of the Bhagavatam, it says, with every rising and setting of the sun, we lose a day of our life that we can never bring back. We've just lost it, we wasted it. Except for those who are engaged in hearing and chanting about the glories of the Lord. This is what the Bhagavatam says. So time does not affect those who are engaged in the hearing and chanting of the Lord. Time does not affect those who are serving the Lord, who are dedicated to the service, to meditation upon the Lord. So, but here it's being described that although they have no suffering there, although they have no pain due to their complete Krishna consciousness, they are still pained. They still have some suffering. And what is that suffering? That suffering is a feeling of compassion. It is a feeling of compassion for those unaware of the process of devotional service, who are subjected to unsurpassable miseries in the material world. So their suffering is on account of those who are suffering in this material world. And that is the only suffering of the devotees of the Lord. They have no other suffering. So the devotee has no problems for themselves. If we're actually a devotee, we have no suffering for ourselves. An advanced devotee, we can aspire for this. We have no problems for ourselves on account of our Krishna consciousness. But we have suffering, and that suffering is only to see the suffering of others. The devotees, the true devotees, they feel pain on account of feeling or seeing the suffering of others. And Prahlad Maharaj, in one of his prayers, he mentions this point. And I'll share my screen. This is a very famous verse that Srila Prabhupada has quoted on many accounts. One of the most quoted verses of Srila Prabhupada. Prayena deva munayasva vimukti kama maunam charanti vijanena parartha nishta naitan vihaya kripanan vimumuksha eko nanyam tvadasya sharanam brahmato nupashye. Prayena deva munayasva vimukti kama maunam charanti vijanena parartha nishta naitan vihaya kripanan vimumuksha eko nanyam tvadasya sharanam brahmato nupashye. My dear Lord Nrsingadev, I see that there are many saintly persons indeed, but they are interested only in their own deliverance, not caring for the big cities and towns. They go to the Himalayas or the forest to meditate with vows of silence. They are not interested in delivering others. As for me, however, I do not wish to be liberated alone, leaving aside all these poor fools and rascals. I know that without Krishna consciousness, without taking shelter of your lotus feet, one cannot be happy. Therefore, I wish to bring them back to the shelter at your lotus feet. And then in the purport, Prabhupada here is saying, this is the decision of the Vaishnava, the pure devotee of the Lord. For himself, he has no problems, even if he has to stay in this material world, because his only business is to remain in Krishna consciousness. The Krishna conscious person can go even to hell and still be happy. Therefore, Prahlad Maharaj said, Naivo dvije paraduratyaya vaitaranya. O best of the great personalities, I am not at all afraid of material existence. The pure devotee is never unhappy in any condition of life. This is confirmed in Srimad Bhagavatam. Devotees solely engaged in the devotional service of the Supreme Personality of God in Narayan never fear any condition of life. For them, the heavenly planets, liberation, and the hellish planets are all the same. For such devotees are interested only in the service of the Lord. For a devotee, being situated in the heavenly planets and being in the hellish planets are equal. For a devotee lives neither in heaven nor in hell, but with Krishna in the spiritual world. The secret of success for the devotee is not understood by the karmis and jnanis. Karmis therefore try to be happy by material adjustment, and jnanis want to be happy by becoming one with the Supreme. The devotee has no such interest. He is not interested in so-called meditation in the Himalayas or the forest. Rather, his interest is in the busiest part of the world, where he teaches people Krishna consciousness. The Krishna consciousness movement was started for this purpose. We do not teach one to meditate in a secluded place just so that one may show that he has become very much advanced and may be proud of his so-called transcendental meditation, although he engages in all sorts of foolish materialistic activity. A Vaishnava like Prahlad Maharaj is not interested in such a bluff of spiritual advancement. Rather, he is interested in enlightening people in Krishna consciousness, because that is the only way for them to become happy. Prahlad Maharaj says clearly, Nanyam tvadasya sharanam brahmato nupashye. I know that without Krishna consciousness, without taking shelter of your lotus feet, one cannot be happy. One wanders within the universe, life after life. But by the grace of a devotee, a servant of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, one can get the clue to Krishna consciousness, and then not only become happy in this world, but also return home back to Godhead. That is a real target in life. The members of the Krishna consciousness movement are not at all interested in so-called meditation in the Himalayas or the forest, where one will only make a show of meditation, nor are they interested in opening many schools for yoga and meditation in the cities. Rather, every member of the Krishna consciousness movement is interested in going door to door to try to convince people about the teachings of Bhagavad Gita as it is, the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. That is the purpose of the Hare Krishna movement. The members of the Krishna consciousness movement must be fully convinced that without Krishna, one cannot be happy. Thus, the Krishna consciousness person avoids all kinds of pseudo-spiritualists, transcendentalists, meditators, monists, philosophers, and philanthropists. So, very nice points here are being described, and this is why I read this purport, which is almost exactly the same as the purport that we just read today. This sentence again is being described here. The members of the Krishna consciousness movement must be fully convinced that without Krishna, one cannot be happy. And then here also in the translation, in the last sentence, Prahlad Maharaj is saying, I know that without Krishna consciousness, without taking shelter of your lotus feet, one cannot be happy. Therefore, I wish to bring them back to shelter at your lotus feet. So I mentioned how for the devotee, there's only one unhappiness, and that is seeing the unhappiness of others, right? They have no other unhappiness, but seeing others engaged or absorbed in materialistic life. And why do they feel that unhappiness? So that is their unhappiness, to see others in materialistic life. But what is the cause? Why do they feel unhappy when they see others in materialistic life? The reason is because they are convinced that in this material life, there's no happiness. And therefore they know that as happy as people may seem in this material world, as happy as they may appear in this material world, if they're absorbed in materialistic life, they are unhappy. They can only be unhappy. It's not possible to be happy in this material world. On account of that deep conviction, on account of that deep understanding, they feel great compassion and great unhappiness on seeing the unhappiness of others. So we can actually only preach to others. Prabhupada actually says this. We can only actually share Krishna consciousness with others if we are convinced that people are unhappy, if we are convinced that this material life, there's no happiness in it. There's only suffering. And it's an interesting point because before, when going out on preaching, it may be book distribution or something. Devotees initially, they feel that, I'm out distributing books in the cold and see these people are enjoying, and here I am suffering while I'm distributing, or I'm Here, I'm suffering as a devotee while just see these materialistic people. They have such nice, comfortable lives and they're enjoying. But as we develop in our Krishna consciousness, as we also just see this material world and understand the nature of this world, we become more and more convinced. We become more and more aware that no, actually, it's only a facade, that actually there's no happiness in this world. In other words, we don't feel envious of the happiness, of the so-called material happiness of others. And when we don't feel jealous of their happiness, then we're actually able to help them. And Srila Prabhupada actually mentioned this a few times to his different devotees, some of whom had taken sannyas or were brahmacharis. He told them never be envious of the materialistic householders. So we sometimes go preaching and we see a man, walking away from his Mercedes and in his very comfortable, nice, woolen jacket and with his family members and his nice children, and everything seems nice. And we think, oh, what a great life this person has. But the devotee knows that this is just a mirage. The devotee knows that not just in the future, even in the present, this person is actually not enjoying. We try to convince ourselves, just like in the material world, people, by watching a film, by watching a movie, they try to convince themselves that they're happy. By identifying with the happiness of the characters in the movie, they think that, oh, I am happy. But actually, the moment the movie finishes, they're in misery again. And even while watching the movie, they're not enjoying anything. They're actually miserable. This is why they're trying to enjoy vicariously through the bodies of others. Just like ghosts, right? Ghosts, they take the body of another person to enjoy through the body of that person. In the same way, when we're watching a movie, we have, even coming from India, we have great attachment to movies. In America, it's Hollywood. In India, it's Bollywood. And why people are so attached to watching movies? Because they're enjoying this world vicariously. Through the body of someone else, we're trying to enjoy this material world. So Prabhupada, in this purport that we're reading, today's purport, he says that a bona fide acharya preaches this truth of returning home back to Godhead and warns men not to make a false plan for happiness in a place where happiness is only a myth. So when we spend time in trying to make a happy situation in this material world, or when we spend time to make a comfortable situation in this material world, the Acharya is telling us that actually we are just wasting our time because we're trying to make a false plan for happiness in a place where there is no happiness. Happiness is only a myth. There is no pleasure. There's no true pleasure. There's no permanent pleasure. It's all flickering. We feel happy for some time, for some months, for some years, and then that happiness vanishes. So that is not true happiness. And therefore, the great devotees of the Lord want to show people the path for true happiness. So the devotee is not being a pessimist. The devotee is not saying there is no true happiness. The devotee is saying that we're looking for it in the wrong place. And here in this path, this spiritual path, we can find true happiness. And it is this feeling of compassion that is being expressed here by Prahlad Maharaj. Prahlad Maharaj is saying, I have no problems for myself, but my pain is that this world, the living beings around us, they are suffering without this spiritual knowledge, without the true spiritual knowledge, without the knowledge given by the great acharyas. They're suffering without that knowledge, and that is my only unhappiness. And this is why in the first paragraph of this purport, Prabhupada spends the time talking about real knowledge. What is real knowledge? Because people have knowledge in this world, but even when they come to spiritual life, they're misled. So the only process of getting out of this materialistic life is by gaining spiritual knowledge. It's very interesting. I was just reading when the Yaksha asks Maharaj Yudhishthira the questions. When Maharaj Yudhishthira is at the lake, that famous scene in the Mahabharata, right? He's at this lake, and all of his brothers have taken water from the lake and they've died temporarily. They die. And then Maharaj Yudhishthira comes. He's shocked to see all of his brothers have died. Then a Yaksha appears and he says that I have killed all your brothers. And this Yaksha is actually Dharma, who's testing Maharaj Yudhishthira. And he says that I've killed all your brothers because they did not answer my questions before taking water from my lake. So he said, you must answer my questions. And so Maharaj Yudhishthira says, okay, I will do that. So he asks him many questions. And two of them, actually three of them, are as follows. The first one, he says, what is the most amazing thing, the most famous one? The Yaksha asked Maharaj Yudhishthira, what is the most amazing thing in this world? And Maharaj Yudhishthira replies, the most amazing thing is that although everyone in this world is dying, and when people die, we feel so sorry for them. People are dying in Ukraine, in Russia, right now, everywhere, but that's in the forefront. We feel so sorry for them. But we forget that we are also on the same train. We are also standing on the door of death at every moment. So although we see everyone dying around us, every person thinks that I am eternal. And this, Maharaj Yudhishthira says, is the most amazing thing. And then the Yaksha asks, what is moving this world forward? And Maharaj Yudhishthira responds that it is the ladle of time. It is time that is moving this world forward and destroying everyone. And then the third question, he says, is how can one become free from miseries? What is the process of becoming free from suffering and misery? Very interesting that in Vedic times, Vedic culture, all the kings were being asked this question or were asking this question. It's such an opposite society than what we see today. Today's leaders, they don't care if people are suffering. In fact, they are the ones who put people in suffering, just due to some political maneuvering. They are willing to see so many people suffer. But in previous times, the kings, their number one concern was, how can we free the society as leaders, as guides, as people in the most responsible positions? How can we free society from all suffering? And so the Yaksha asked Maharaj Yudhishthira, you're the ideal king. You're the greatest king. How can we free people from misery? And to this, Maharaj Yudhishthira replies, he says that by knowledge of the Supreme Lord, by knowledge about the Supreme Lord, one can become free from material misery. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, in this world, there's nothing as sublime as transcendental knowledge. It all begins with knowledge, right? When we receive the knowledge of Bhagavad Gita, when we give people the Bhagavad Gita, then they read the Gita and that changes their life. Or when we give them the Bhagavatam, it changes their life. And then after that, they become devotees and they start to, take to the process of Krishna consciousness. So he says, by spiritual knowledge, by knowledge of the Supreme Lord, one can become free from all miseries. And then he asks Maharaj Yudhishthira, he says, and how can one gain true knowledge? So it said, he says, well, how do you become free from misery? Maharaj Yudhishthira says, by knowledge of the Supreme Lord. And then he says, well, how can you gain that knowledge? And then Maharaj Yudhishthira, he says, by serving, by following the superiors. Mahajana yena gata sapanta. And here Prabhupada is saying the same thing. By the disciplic succession, by receiving that knowledge, not by mental speculation, not by academic scholarship, but by receiving that knowledge through the spiritual process, then we gain that spiritual knowledge. Then we gain that spiritual wisdom. And Krishna in the Gita tells us the same thing. He says, go to a tattva darshina, someone who has seen the truth. And then what does he say? Tad vidhi pranipatina pariprashnena sevaya upadekshanti tad jnanam jnaninas tattva darshina. By inquiring from them, by serving them, one gains this spiritual knowledge. So this spiritual knowledge is revealed to those who are on this path of spiritual wisdom, who are accepting the spiritual knowledge. Now, in order to give this spiritual knowledge to others, right? In order to develop that feeling of a compassion for others, one has to be experiencing, or one has to realize, or you could say, experience that knowledge oneself, right? How will we feel compassion for others if we ourselves are not experiencing freedom from material suffering by the process of devotional service, right? So we said how the devotee is convinced that in this material world, there's only material life cannot bring us happiness. There's no pleasure in this world. And the great happiness, the only happiness, Krishna consciousness. So this feeling of this conviction can manifest in our heart when we ourselves are feeling very happy, or you could say we don't even have to become fully self-realized, but we have the appreciation in our heart that yes, spiritual life is everything that I need. I'm feeling very satisfied, or so to say, one has at least the intellectual understanding that Krishna consciousness is the perfect solution for everything. So that is where our own practice comes into play. That one has to come to the platform of the residents of Satyaloka, where they are themselves free from pain, fear, death, old age, disease, all these things. And because of their Krishna consciousness, then they're feeling this compassion for others. Then they're able to share this knowledge with great conviction, with great compassion. It's very natural that when we have something very nice ourselves, when we are very happy with something ourselves, then we want to share it with others. So that feeling of sharing Krishna consciousness with others naturally comes within our heart when we ourselves feel the pleasure of Krishna consciousness. Because then we see others and we think, they're missing out on this. They're missing out on something so wonderful. They're struggling so hard in this material world. But for what? So that feeling naturally comes. And therefore, Prabhupada says, the devotee is naturally paradukha dukhi. The devotee has no suffering for themselves, but they feel for the suffering of others. Paradukha dukhi. They want to see the happiness of others. And this is actually this is the stage of Brahma Bhuta. This is the stage of realization. We come to Krishna consciousness. We practice Krishna consciousness. We are doing Krishna conscious activities. But as we are advancing in spiritual life, then we actually start to get true feelings of at one point the external turns internal. Externally, we're doing the Krishna conscious activities, but then internally our heart starts to change. And what is that change of heart? The change of heart is when we take pleasure in seeing the happiness of others. When we are, when our heart becomes fully purified, and we are not feeling any lacking in our life. We don't feel any lacking in our life, and so therefore we feel for the happiness of others. We want to see others happy, and this is Prabhupada. He actually says, therefore, this is actually the highest realization in Krishna consciousness. It includes all other realizations. This one sentence, which is also the essence of Lord Chaitanya's teachings, which is para dukkha dukhi. This includes all other things. When we are, the mood of Vasudev Datta, Prabhupada says, this is the prime example of this, where Vasudev Datta, like Prahlad Maharaj, and like the residents of Satyaloka, he tells Lord Chaitanya, he says that, let me suffer, and in place of me, let everyone else go back home, back to Godhead. Let everyone else be happy. Srila Prabhupada says that this is actually the highest emotion that a devotee can feel. Why? Because it includes everything else. It includes all the other qualities that we can aspire for. A person who has this mood, has this feeling, is already naturally tolerant. A person who has this feeling is already naturally humble. A person who has this feeling is already naturally kind, is compassionate. Every other quality that the devotee aspires for is already within that. And so, therefore, to train our consciousness, to train our mindset so we think like this and we feel like this, therefore, Srila Prabhupada engaged us in this preaching movement of Krishna conscious preaching movement. Because by not only practicing Krishna consciousness ourselves, but by sharing it with others, by sharing Krishna consciousness, we start to come in the consciousness of not being the enjoyer. Like, not even in spiritual life, we can have the consciousness of wanting to enjoy Krishna, not wanting to enjoy Krishna, but serve Krishna by giving Krishna to others. Not only reading Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam ourselves, but also sharing it with others. Not only benefiting from the benefits of spiritual knowledge ourselves, but seeing others benefit from it. Not only serving Krishna ourselves, but engaging others in the service of Krishna. Not only chanting ourselves, but engaging others in the chanting of the holy name of Krishna. So in this way, becoming a servant of Krishna. And in this way, surpassing the miseries of this material world. So I think I've spoken a lot. Many points are here. It's such a nice verse. And I would love to hear all of your realizations on this point. I should also mention one more thing. I was remembering there's one purport where Prabhupada, he says that this is actually the quality of a devotee, that the devotee says, knows, is already convinced that no one can be happy in this material world. And therefore that devotee does not aspire or strive for material happiness. They don't make, because they already know that. And that's why they're very happy. That's why they're not frustrated or they don't have a feeling of discontent. Because they expect this from this world, that this world is a place of unhappiness. The only true happiness is Krishna consciousness. The only true pleasure in this world is service to Krishna. And gradually, this does not happen overnight, but gradually, more and more, the devotee, the more they feel the pleasure in spiritual life, their interest in material life decreases. And this is a gradual process. So I'll stop here and we can have discussion.
Krishna Prabhu, this is Vansidhari Das Prabhu. Please accept my humble obeisances. Aklashla Prabhupada.
Please accept my humble obeisances.
I have tons of questions. Can I go ahead, Prabhu?
Yes, of course, Prabhu.
uh, so first question I have is, it is little bit off topic, Prabhu. So because you're okay for tons of questions, I'll take other people's time also in this question.
Well, you also probably have the answers, Prabhu.
So the first question, Prabhu, the context, I was trying to see the context, and the context is that it's all, this verse is about residents of Satyaloka, and Prabhupada just turned it to devotional service and actually turned it fully into devotional aspect. So, I mean, I kind of thinking maybe it's also really touching the mission spirit. So maybe that may be the reason. But my question I was having is, seeing the context, having that thing, is something wrong I'm doing. So that's the question. One,
So
what I'm having.
something wrong that you're doing regarding what?
Seeing the context of this verse, this is really related to Satyaloka devotees. They're not really devotees yet. I mean, but Prabhupada turns it to devotional service in the translation itself, and the purport is more about the devotional consciousness.
I see.
But in the line of the verses, yoga part is finished, and now going to different planets. So there is a disconnect there. Actually, I mean, that's what my perception is. So that's what my is because I'm trying to gain the experience of practice of seeing the context.
Yes. So the thing is, I think you're completely correct in that here the context is they're describing the residents of different planets, and the different planets. The whole second canto is very much about the cosmic manifestation, and here they're describing the planets of Satyaloka. And here, the point that you're making is Prabhupada is talking about the planets of Satyaloka and sort of turning it into a discussion on devotional service. But the Satyaloka residents are great yogis, but not exactly devotees. I think that's what your point is. So why is that? Why is Prabhupada almost presenting it as though they are devotees of the Lord? But the thing is, although the verse is not mentioned here, although it's not mentioned exactly in the verse, Prabhupada is actually translating it in context, because the leader of the Satyalok, the person who's leading the planet of Satyalok, is Lord Brahma, who is the head of our Sampradaya, Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya. And we also know from the Bhagavatam, he's an unalloyed devotee of Krishna. And all the sages there, they are in some ways under the shelter of Lord Brahma. They are liberated souls themselves, but still Lord Brahma is even more advanced than them. The most, like Prabhupada says, the most qualified living entity in this world becomes Lord Brahma. Thus Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya. So our disciplic succession starts from him. He's the original guru. So their original guru is actually Lord Balaram, but he's the first in our line. So he is giving the process of devotional service to the residents of Satyaloka. And therefore, by understanding that, we can understand that they are devotees of the Lord. Another resident of Satyaloka is Narad Muni. Narad Muni is the son of Lord Brahma. And although he is continuously traveling, so in that sense, he's not a resident of Satyaloka. But if it is to be said that he has an abode, that would be Satyaloka. Another resident of Satyaloka would be like Atri Rishi and all the sages that come with Narada. They are all residents of Satyaloka, and they're all pure devotees of the Lord who are oftentimes speaking in the Bhagavatam or giving instructions about devotional service. This is my understanding.
Sure, Prabhu. So basically, like we also hear that, whether you're a pure devotee, as long you're following Rupa Goswami, you're a pure devotee kind of explanation I'm correlating. And I'll move on to my other questions. So this consciousness that is mentioned in this verse, um, or that like the teaching, looks to be impractical from the point of seeing from being the resident of Kali Yuga. Uh, you did mention that it is gradual, and then gradual looks to be very gradual for a practitioner. Um, putting that point on the table, Prabhupada mentions here one should really get trained. Brahmana means one should really be, one needs to go through strict guidance, something like that. So then I'm wondering, like, what does it mean? Because I'm not finding myself ready for guidance, and I don't see others also ready for any guidance. And to see in the context here that even the teachers or seniors are also maybe not well equipped for that. Like, if I see myself as a teacher or a senior, I find myself deficient. So what does it mean, Prabhu? Like, then Brahmana means, or a devotee means, one needs to be strictly guided, something like that.
Yes, no, that's a very nice question, actually. And in Krishna consciousness, we see that even Prabhupada here, the sentence that he says, a qualified Brahmana is one who has undergone strict training under the guidance of a bona fide spiritual master. And in another place, I think in this purport, or it was the other purport I was reading, Prabhupada was saying that one should get training from the spiritual master. And we see that that it's not an easy thing to serve the spiritual master, to take training from the spiritual master. It's actually very difficult to surrender to the spiritual master and be trained by them, to accept their instructions, or to this is why Krishna says in the Gita, Manushyanam sahasreshu kasyadyatati siddhaya, that out of many thousands of people who endeavor for spiritual life, one of them is actually able to make it further. And we see, there's so many pitfalls on this path of spiritual life. We sometimes very quickly want to become like the spiritual master, become spiritual masters ourselves, right? And in this way, in this way, we want to, become the spiritual master. That happens so many times, where people are too quickly, they are so to say, not following their spiritual master, doing their own thing or something like this. So there's so many pitfalls, but Krishna's given us the process. He says, Tadvidi pranipatena pariprashnena sevya, that we approach the spiritual master, we take guidance from them, and we serve them. And then the spiritual master knows how to guide us, right? The spiritual master knows how to guide us, but at the same time, the spiritual master gives us a movement to help us make spiritual knowledge, because the spiritual master is not always there with us. So we take guidance from the spiritual master's movement. And this is why the spiritual master's movement is there to help us. And this is something very nice. Prabhupada actually says that the devotees, the sadhus, they play a very important role. The spiritual master cannot in some ways, how does he exactly say it? He says is that the Vaishnavas, they the devotee he doesn't undermine the spiritual masters. He says spiritual master is the ultimate guide, ultimate. But he says that, but one cannot get everything simply by. Most devotees, they don't have that association. That's the point, with their spiritual master so often. So then they get the rest of it, so to say, what they miss from the god brothers of the spiritual master. And therefore the devotee sees the god brothers of his spiritual master as good as a spiritual master. Lord Chaitanya also showed this, and also by the other senior devotees in our movement. So so you raised such a nice point, Prabhu, that the training is very important, and we take that guidance from the spiritual master and from the devotees who are there to guide us. And it's Prabhupada says it's very simple for the simple, right? He says Krishna consciousness is simple for the simple. So if we just take that spiritual life and we try to take that guidance of the spiritual master and apply it, try our best, then we make advancement, and then Krishna helps us on the way. Ultimately, the spiritual master is Krishna, because he's the one within the heart who gives us knowledge, who gives us guidance on how we can progress in spiritual life. So he also has to give us that intelligence. I'm not sure if I really did justice to that question.
Yeah, I mean, one thing it looks to be that one has to be simple-hearted, both ways, like one not to think or aspire himself to the top consciousness right away, pretty quickly, or like, I mean, be real where we are. That's one of the essence, and ultimately the principles are going to work. So we need to hang on to Krishna or spiritual master or seniors in the line. That's what I'm gathering from.
Yes. Yes, we're all trying for that, right? It's easier said than done, but that is the real thing. At the, yeah, and Krishna says it's joyfully performed. So Krishna consciousness is also very joyfully performed. And I was just hearing this morning in a class, Prabhupada was saying that how, and this is actually a very nice point to add on this, that he was saying how Lord Chaitanya, he had many devotees who were very close to him. And one of them was Shivananda Sen, who was a householder. And Shivananda Sen had children, and he had a family, and he had, he was earning money. And Lord Chaitanya considered him as one of his very close associates. He didn't have a problem with that. He wasn't, he was happy with Shivananda Sen's devotional service and considered himself as one of his devotees, because he was honestly carrying out his ashram as a grihastha, and he was serving the Lord through that ashram, and he was fulfilling his spiritual life. At the same time, he was a grihastha. So he said Lord Chaitanya is very is not asking for us for anything extraordinary, but Prabhupada says what he does not want is hypocrisy. But at the same time, if a devotee who was in the renounced order of life, if they were, after, you could say, if they even saw a woman, he rejected them. So wherever we're at, we can stay in our spiritual, we must advance, and Lord Chaitanya will accept our gradual advancement, or you could say our sincere attachment. Not, the issue is not gradual, as long as that devotee is sincere, like you're saying. They're earnestly trying to make spiritual advancement. Yes.
I'm thinking, I'm satisfied. I'm only thinking of a side question, then it becomes, I mean, simplicity, looks to be making all the teachings and the goal and everything makes it easy. Then it's also bringing me a question then. um, like I'm specifically thinking of Lord Chaitanya's servant who got swayed away with the the prostitutes, that kind of episode happened, right, Prabhu?
Yes.
So Lord Chaitanya was not happy, but he is happy with Sivananda Sen,
Mm.
who is happily and sincerely practicing. So, so that brahmachari should not have taken up the brahmachari position if he
Yes.
if he has not if he's not ready. Is that what, Prabhu?
Yes, so that's one teaching there that Lord Chaitanya is saying that Prabhupada's actually point was this, and I didn't mention the other side, but he was contrasting. He was saying that I think, and that's his name was slipping my mind. I think it was Govinda, who was in,
Yeah.
or is Chota Haridas also. Both, there's two examples. That on one hand, they just they looked at a woman, and Lord Chaitanya punished them so severely. And Shivananda Sen, on the other hand, was a householder, and he had wife, children, and Lord Chaitanya is okay with him. So Prabhupada was making this exact point. He was saying that we should be situated in our ashram, whichever ashram we are, and do that nicely. So that was one point. But the other point is that, even to answer your question, even to Chota Haridas and others, Lord Chaitanya was still showing his mercy. Now, that mercy came in the form of some punishment, some chastisement, but still they attained the lotus feet of Lord Chaitanya. But he had to correct that. He did have to correct that behavior.
Okay. Okay, then this also comes into simplicity. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, Prabhuji. So apologies, I took quite a bit of time, but it is very helpful. Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you. Thank you. Any final question or comment? We're already over time, but if anyone would like to share anything.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you so much. I think one point I was just, maybe I was trying to ask you a little bit more. I think time regarding the non-enviousness. Not becoming envious about the other people. I think the examples that you gave, and I think at least we need to be intellectually convinced, right, that it is actually the real enjoyment, right? So I think that's what so that is on the platform of knowledge, right, Prabhu?
Yes.
If you can.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say maybe if you can just add a few more points on that. So
yes. So that is on the level of knowledge, but also on Vijnana, on the level of realization. Because in our life, the way Krishna set up this material world, we also start to realize that, how material life is just a facade. How, although people have, so much material opulence, but internally they're so unhappy. And it's not just that, oh, the Shastras are telling us this, or, the renounced souls are telling us this, and they, and it's just a form of pessimism, because, like, people criticize religion. Oh, they're poor, and so therefore they say, oh, in this material world there's no happiness because they're not rich, like a sour grapes philosophy, like just a pessimism that, oh, you don't have material life, you have a bad life, and therefore you think that there's no happiness in this world. But no, there's a deep realization that the devotee has, a deep realization that, no, actually, there's no happiness in this material world. There's one purport in one line where Prabhupada says, no one can be happy in family life. He just says this, plain and simple. And after reading it, a person, oh, okay, actually, this is normal. Prabhupada is actually calling a spade a spade. So on one hand, a person can be a very Krishna conscious devotee in their family life, but on the other hand, they will also know that, well, in family life, there will always be difficulties, there will always be troubles, even as a devotee. What to speak of the materialist? What to speak of those who have no Krishna consciousness? At least as devotees, we have a way of spiritualizing it so that we can actually experience spiritual happiness in spiritual relationships, spiritual devotee relationships. And Prabhupada says this, how family life, when the family members are devotees, it actually becomes a spiritual relationship. It actually, Prabhupada says, then it is not a material relationship anymore. Again, that takes time for the material consciousness to turn into spiritual consciousness. But Prabhupada actually has said this very clearly, that with devotees, that relationship becomes devotional, and therefore devotees like Shivananda Sen, they can actually show that that spiritual, that how household life can be fully spiritual. But the point is that the devotee has a realization that this is not just the Shastras or the sadhus saying this, but actually in this material world, there is no true happiness.
Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Yes. Yes. And therefore, there's no envy. That's how it relates to the non-enviness. Yes.
I think Balram Prasad Prabhu has a point.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dhanvat Pranam, all glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna, Dhanvat Pranam, Prabhu.
Prabhu, in the context of what you are answering, I was thinking, Prabhupada's, there is a chant and be happy, the book, right? Let me, there are other people's realization and ask questions also, but there are two questions in this aspect. One is a devotee, we as a devotees, you said how to become servant of Krishna. It's not just you chant Hare Krishna, you make others chant Hare Krishna. It is not that you read Bhagavatam, you make others read Bhagavatam, so that in that way you become servant of Krishna, right? There are certain things you said. That makes totally sense. Thank you. So one person little did marketing on the Krishna conscious level, and he brought him to the group, to the association. Then that person asked, you said devotional service is very simple. Then when he came to the Bhakti Vriksha association, then he saw tons of books of Prabhupada, and then said, I thought it is simple. You said it's very simple, but you show me 18 volumes of Srimad Bhagavatam, small books, 25 books, and then Chaitanya Charitamrita, so many volumes. I think it is complicated. You said it is very simple. So what is the meaning of chant and be happy? That's first part of it. The second part of it, for me to understand, chant and be happy. I'm still not happy. Maybe I'm chanting many years, but I don't know what is happiness means in that context. So it's just a kind of bothering my question. Sorry, please.
Yes. The thing is, to your second point first, that many years is a very relative term, right? Many years is a very relative term, and this is a question I've asked also, so it's very close to my heart, your point, because you think many years I've been doing. When we read the scriptures, Bhagavatam, Gita, we see that the bhakti yogis, this is not just yogis, but the bhakti yogis who are, have attained Krishna, are in association with Krishna, is described so often that they are meditating upon the Lord, or they're serving the Lord for thousands of years, and then the Lord appears before them. So we have the example of like Dhruva Maharaj, in 6 months he did it. There you have examples in that way. But therefore, Dhruva Maharaj is actually glorified for this point, that no one in the world, in the history of humankind, in the past or in the future, did what he did, which is see the Lord face to face after 6 months. And this is because he was Dhruva, he was determined. But when we see the example of these great souls, we see either the length or the intensity of their spiritual practice. So we think many years, but we don't realize that how you could say, how intense Tivrena bhakti yogena. This is actually from the Bhagavatam. Tivrena bhakti yogena. That by the intense practice of devotional service, akama sarva kama va moksha kama udariti, then all the desires within our heart are destroyed by the practice of intense devotional service. So how intense it needs to be, that we don't often realize. And since we are doing it in a somewhat casual way, the result is also accordingly. So if we practice Krishna consciousness for 30 years, but we do it casually, not so intensely, then the result will be the same. Just like if I'm exercising to lose weight, and every day I go for a walk every morning, I exercise, every morning, but it's a casual exercise. I'll maintain my weight. I won't increase it, but it won't decrease. To decrease it, I have to do it very intensely. So to my understanding, our biggest problem is, one is time. With time, gradually, this process will act. So either we just have to be patient, and it could be many lifetimes. And we should even think that that is small. And then the second thing is regarding intensity, that the main reason we don't get that result immediately is due to the lack of intensity. And a nice example of this is, again, I believe it's Chota Haridas. I always get confused with their names, and I should have checked before the class. But when Lord Chaitanya rejects him, no, this one I think was Govinda, that when he rejects him, he says, no, you cannot come in my association. Then he requests the devotees on his behalf to ask Lord Chaitanya, you've thrown me out of the association of devotees, so when can I come back? When will I be able to see you again? I made this offense, but please tell me, when will I be able to see you again? And Lord Chaitanya sends the message back. He says that after 1 million lifetimes, he'll be able to see me again. You give him that message, not before 1 million lifetimes. And so when he hears this, the Lord Chaitanya said that after 1 million lifetimes, he'll get to see Krishna. He starts to dance in ecstasy. And then the news comes back to Lord Chaitanya. And he says that, after hearing this, he started dancing in ecstasy, that after 1 million lifetimes, he'll come to Lord Chaitanya. And when Lord Chaitanya hears this, that his devotee is so determined, and you could say has such a positive mood, that after 1 million lifetimes, I'll be able to see the Lord, and how short that is. Then Lord Chaitanya says, okay, you bring him, he can see me now. So we think it's a long time, but the pure devotees of the Lord, they think that even 1 million lifetimes is very quick for someone like me to see the Supreme Lord. That was, Lord Chaitanya was very touched by his expression of humility, that he thought even 1 million lifetimes, wow, how intent, how eager this devotee is, and how humble they are to see me, and therefore he's qualified to see me at this moment. So we think that this is a long time, but what is a long time? One place, Aindra Prabhu, he mentions how, he says how that the process of Krishna consciousness is a gradual process. And then he says we can make it as gradual as we like. So it takes time, but at the same time, how gradual we want to make it, that is up to us. Meaning that he's playing on words. He's saying that it doesn't have to take so much time. If we are practicing very intensely, then it'll take less time. So the issue is really the intensity of our spiritual practice. And regarding your first question on the books, the number of books, Prabhupada actually said that all of these books, these hundreds of pages that he's written, he said they're simply written to convince us to chant the holy name of Krishna. Just like there's thousands of philosophy books, there's so many Vedas, all to convince us, Athatu Brahma Jigyasa, that we are the soul, we are the Atma. But it has to be explained in so many different ways, by so many different people, for so many different people, different mindsets. Just like there's thousands of physics books that are just explaining the 3 laws of Newton. In the same way, all of these books, there's so many of them, but the message is the same. It all ends with chant the holy name of Krishna. But if we don't read them, Prabhupada says, then why don't we just chant? Why do we spend time reading these books? Are we wasting our time when we read these books? Then he says, if we don't read, then we won't be able to chant. Then we'll give up our chanting because we'll forget, right? The conviction will not be there. So we need these books to remind us again and again to chant. We need to read every day because every day we need to be reminded. And in my own life, that's so true. After like 2 days, I forget, how important my chanting is. How important it is to chant, and I become lax or don't chant nicely. So we know the philosophy, but Prabhupada is saying every day we have to read, because these different pastimes, these different lives of the great souls are in different ways increasing our conviction in our heart that I need to surrender my life to Krishna. I need to chant the holy name of Krishna. Yes, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu. That definitely answers my questions. But another thing is chant and be happy, right? So that one, many people, many devotees have this question: what is this chant and be happy means? As I said, they're chanting. I don't know whether a happiness is there. I think you mentioned when Lingaraj Prabhu's question also, you mentioned something like that. Even in the devotee's life, there are miseries. It doesn't mean that you have to be, there is no happiness. You're getting a spiritual happiness. I understand that point of view. But how do we, as say, I don't know much, so I'll invite another guy, the person who is new, and then how do I convince him?
Yes. Well, the thing is, one time I think this is a conversation between Prabhupada and someone, and a devotee, and then Prabhupada says, well, try not chanting, right? So if we stop chanting, then we actually realize how unhappy we are. So you're absolutely right that until we come to the platform of pure devotional service or pure chanting, we don't realize that complete happiness, which is described as, moksha lagatakrit, which is happiness greater than liberation, or sannyananda visheshatma, this unlimited, incalculable happiness. That certainly we are not feeling. And like you're saying, we shouldn't pretend, or we shouldn't be in any doubt that we're not feeling that happiness. But if we stop chanting, then we actually see how miserable we are. Right? So we are experiencing happiness. But happiness also is not a degree, right? It's also a gradual thing. So the happiness is there. That's why we are chanting. I mean, which sane person can take 2 hours out of their schedule every single day and do something that isn't bringing them happiness? Like 2 hours in a person's day is a big chunk of time. After work, you have only 3 or 4 hours in the day left. And of that, 2 hours we're spending in chanting. So Prabhupada says, which sane person can do that if they're not experiencing something? And I've experienced that in my own life, that when you stop chanting, then you realize, oh my gosh, everything is going wrong. Right? There's no happiness in this world.
Yes. Thank you, Prabhu. That I have another question, but maybe it's already time. Maybe Jyotirmaya Mataji is raised a question. Let her ask. Then we'll see. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. This is Sachi Satadas. Please accept my humble obeisances. Prabhu, if you have time, you can address. Otherwise, I'm also fine, Prabhu. But my question is, in the mixed state of devotional practice, like me, I came to know like taking this process, like taking initiation and chanting, it's not only beneficial to the person who is doing, but it's also beneficial to its family members, especially when they have departed. And I understand that the relationship in the material world is all temporary. Can you throw some light on how this process is facilitating, or how this is helping the relationship, those who have departed, or the relationship that exists in this world?
No, actually, see, our relationships with devotees, this is my understanding, is actually also eternal, because everything in spiritual life is eternal. Particularly the relationship with the spiritual master, right? It's eternal. So in the same way, our relationship with devotees is actually, it has some eternal significance to it. So by chanting and by becoming Krishna conscious, becoming a devotee of the Lord, our relationships actually, so if a family becomes a devotee and the members of the family becomes devotees, then actually their relationships become more significant, because that relationship has a spiritual aspect to it, and anything spiritual is eternal, so it has some eternal significance to it. Whereas otherwise, like the Bhagavatam says, we're like sticks coming together in the stream, in the river. Like these sticks come together and then they separate, they vanish. In the same way, different members of families, they come together, they think, oh, I love each other so much, but then they separate at the time of death or even before death, and then everything is gone. I mean, there's nothing left. It's just meaningless. It's insignificant. There's no significance to those relationships. But actually, they become significant when we are devotees. Actually, our loved ones, our children, our parents, those relationships may continue in the spiritual world. They don't have to in a very direct way, because the very concept of family is a material concept, right? Prabhupada says in one place, he says sannyas, which is renunciation. Sannyas means making the whole world one's family. So in some sense, our feeling of this is family and something else is not family is a material conception, because the whole world is our family, because Krishna is our father, and our relationship is with Krishna. Our relationship, in family life, relationships are connected or through the father, the grandfather, right? So that's how the family tree comes. So if Krishna is our original father, that means all of us are connected, and we're all brothers and sisters. And many times people say, well, spiritual life, does it mean that, I don't love my family? And like, what about this family? Like, I love each other so much. How can this monk just leave his family and become a monk? How is it even possible? In that vision, people, they can't even make sense of it. But actually, the false conception is when you think someone is not your family. It's actually a very selfish way of thinking, that this is my family and this other person is not my family. Just like today, NATO is saying, you're a NATO country, I'll protect you. But if you're every inch of NATO country, we will protect. But if you're not NATO, then you can go to hell. So I mean, what is that? That is selfishness in one sense, right? And I'm not commenting on the war. I'm just making that this is the material consciousness. So in the same way, in mature life, family life is given so much emphasis, but real relationships are spiritual relationships. And when the spiritual relationships that we develop, those are eternal. So if we develop spiritual relationships with our material family today, then that may continue on in the spiritual world, because we have an eternal family. That is the spiritual world that's there. And when we go back to Godhead, we may see each other again. So then actually that relationship becomes very meaningful. I think this is your question. I'm not sure if I answered it.
Yes, Prabhu, you covered it. Thank you very much. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Balaram Prabhu, would you like to?
Yeah, Prabhu. I heard from Rampal Maharaj the other day in one of the classes. Bhakti starts when one person is self-realized. The real bhakti starts. So I was thinking, when do I get self-realized so that I can have that bhakti? I'm as you said, maybe It's not the number of years, not the calendar years, calendar days. That doesn't help for me in my life. So, Tivrena Bhakti Yogena, as Dhruva Maharaj, of course, this is Kali Yuga and it is not Satya Yuga. The way Dhruva Maharaj did in 6 months, people say that in the Kali Yuga, this is much faster here. You don't have to even make 6 months the way Dhruva Maharaj did that. But we are doing lifetimes after lifetimes. So when do I get self-realized so that I'll see the taste of bhakti? Was my question, Prabhu. That's all. Thank you.
Yes, Prabhu. Sorry, I got a little distracted for 1 second. What was the last part that you had mentioned? I missed that.
No, when do I get really a self-realized, even though practicing bhakti? Because the bhakti starts only after once you're self-realized.
Right. Yes, and that's where the I think actually I asked that question to Romapad Maharaj, that what you're referring to.
Oh, really? Maybe I did
yes,
not. Sorry.
No, this same point that he made also, maybe you heard in a different class or the same class, because the verse was saying that how it was that verse Aho Bakiyam, which says that how kind the Lord is to his devotees. That
one of the slides, yes. I think based on that, maybe I did not understand the question, because maybe
no,
it's said Aho Bakiyam, one slide. That was the last slide or last but one slide, something like that. I remember that. Yeah, yes. But maybe I did not realize the answer. Please go ahead, Prabhu.
No, and so he mentioned, so in that verse it's mentioned how if someone is a devotee of the Lord, that Krishna is so merciful that he even liberates Putana. He's so merciful to his devotees that he even liberates Putana and makes her his mother, even though she came in with a inimical attitude towards the Lord. And so I asked Maharaj, I said that, so I mean, we're at least myself, I'm not trying to go and kill Krishna. So if Krishna gave Putana liberation just by this small service, which she came and did with the wrong consciousness, in some ways, the inimical attitude, then do all of us also get liberation? Is it also that we will get liberation? For sure, we will become Krishna's mother or father. And to this, Maharaj, he responded, he said, well, Krishna is not obliged. And secondly, he said that bhakti starts on the platform of self-realization. And actually, that was a different verse that you're saying. This wasn't Aho Bakiyam. This was the verse that he had said. That was a class before. Now I remember that he had the verse said that Lord Brahma was saying that one will liberation will become their rightful claim. If one simply performs bhakti, liberation becomes one's rightful claim. But on the other hand, then I asked Maharaj, I said, but there's a verse which we say every morning in many temples, that even after many, many lifetimes of chanting, if we're chanting with offenses, Bahu Janme Kori Ari Shravana Kirtana, Tabutane Paya Krishna Kore Premadhana, we may still not get love for Krishna, even after chanting for many millions of lifetimes. So here on one side, they're saying that automatically, if you stay alive in Krishna consciousness, you'll get Krishna. But in another verse, it said that for many lifetimes you can chant and you may not get Krishna. So how to make sense of both of these things? And then to that, Maharaj responded, he said that, well, real bhakti starts on the platform of self-realization. And right now we're doing mixed bhakti. And in the Bhagavatam, it's actually described that there's bhakti in the mode of goodness, in the mode of passion, and the mode of ignorance. So we can still be in the modes and doing bhakti. And that bhakti is not unalloyed devotion. That's not the anya bhilashita, the unalloyed devotion to Krishna. So that devotion is needed. And
yeah, that makes now that is telling me, hey, Balram Prasad, long way to go. And then don't think that you will come back this lifetime. So that means we are at least in the platform of the path of devotional service. It depends on how I take that seriously, and then Krishna gives us his mercy and spiritual master's guidance. Yes, as you said, it looks simple but not easy. Then it takes time, but at least I'm happy that I'm in this path. That, as you said, that Chota Haridas, right? That 1 million years. Yeah, I'm happy about that. Maybe we should, in that way, I should realize at least it doesn't matter. I'm in that path. So one day Krishna can open his eyes for me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Prabhu. The thing is, we all feel this way, but at the same time, by the mercy of Prabhupada, we could go back to Godhead in the same lifetime. That is also possible. If we, Prabhupada said this, if we do what he asks us to do, even though we are not qualified, the mercy will take us back to Godhead, and the mercy will come if we please Prabhupada. So the way then around it, the shortcut is that, okay, if we please the pure devotee, then whatever is lacking in us, they will fulfill that lacking. And that's why the key thing is that we should please the pure devotee of the Lord. If we please them, somehow or the other, by following their instructions, like Prabhupada in one place, he says, we just follow the 4 regulated principles, chant 16 rounds every day. And if we do it every single day, he says, I will take you back home, back to Godhead. I guarantee this. And Prabhupada guaranteed it. So if we just do that, we go back home. But like you're saying, doing just that is sometimes not easy. And to do that every single day, we have to read, we have to remind ourselves, we have to become, associate with devotees. But just to do that is hard, right? We have to associate with devotees because we otherwise give that up. But many devotees have done that. And they've even not done it sometimes, and they have gone back to Godhead. So
yeah, Prabhu, I realize that if you don't hear, or if you're not there is no reminders for us, we automatically lose the faith. And then we don't get even the desire to chant Hare Krishna. Yes. So the reminders, it's not that one day, every minute we should think about Krishna is the point there, because what happened recently, I was hearing from one of our God brothers. He was trying to glorify spiritual master the way he was. At this current situation, how he is paralyzed, etc. He's not on his own. For everything, he needs some help. And then one day he went to his, he was back in Sydney in 2-3 years ago. Yes. I was sharing that actually inspired me, and then how simple it can be. So the few examples which inspired me, maybe I'll share. Maharaj is being fed. He cannot eat on his own. So sometimes he can eat, but most of the times he's being fed prasadam, every spoon. So every time he takes even one bite, one spoon, he will chant one mantra. That's the way Maharaj does it. So then person who was counting how many number of spoons, because based on the medical history, the day-to-day, he has to see how many spoons he had taken prasadam based on a small particular size of the spoon. Yes. And that particular day, he was telling, believe it or not, he took 108 spoons. But that doesn't mean, Maharaj has ate 108 spoons. No, that's a quantity, that small spoon. So, and he said, it's like a miracle. He took exactly 108 spoons and he was done with the meal. That means he chanted one round of Hare Krishna.
Wow.
And
just
then
just like Janava Mata, she would, before eating a spoon, she would take the holy name of Krishna.
Yeah, maybe that's what Maharaj is following, who knows. And then one night he was in the night duty, because Maharaj cannot turn to the left or right when you're sleeping, but he feels like, hey, can you make me turn left? So he was there the whole night monitoring Maharaj's thing. And then Maharaj was actually kind of not snoring, but he could feel that he was in deep sleep. But then this person was reading book, and then he suddenly heard something clicker. But Maharaj was definitely, he was in deep sleep. That's what he said. But he could hear the clicker sound. So that means Maharaj he normally holds the clicker in the left hand because the right hand is not that much mobile. So he could feel that even in the night, in the sleep, he was chanting Hare Krishna. But he was basically in the deep sleep. So what the consciousness was. And the next day morning, he woke up and he did some exercise because all the body movements, etc. So then they started counting and do this exercise for so many, maybe half an hour to 45 minutes, something like that.
Yes.
And then Maharaj was, for every movement of his, whatever that physiotherapist said, you move this leg, move that. And he was, by end of all those, the person counted, he said, Maharaj completed 6 rounds. So, and then he was telling, see, we are thinking, how do we remember Krishna all the time? Maharaj is setting an example as giving us. This is what devotion service is, so simple in that way. Wow. Yeah, there are certain things the spiritual master can show us even in that situation. But how do I realize? How do I take it? Yes, it's my botheration. But that is definitely an inspiration. Yes. Right? So the more and more, the person like you, the way your realization is really awesome. We have some realizations, but why do we ask that question? To get that realization from another person that, yes, even though I am thinking I'm right, I'm actually wrong. This is the way to do it. So that's why we need this discussion of Srimad Bhagavatam and association. That totally makes sense. In that way, that's why that association is, because sometimes we don't feel, oh, I know this, but actually I don't know anything. So it's always to be good in the association. Whether you know doesn't matter, whether you ask that question to get a better answer. For me to realize this opens up more and more discussions in that way. Anyway, thank you so much, Prabhu.
Thank you for reminding us of that. Another pastime I heard of Jayapataka Maharaj, your Guru Maharaj, right? That when he was in the hospital with the IV, he was in the hospital, like there's no calendar there, there's no nothing there. But on Ekadashi day, he would not take the IV because he said that it has glucose or something which has grains in it. Correct. And he said, today's Ekadashi, so I won't take it. Like, it's just shocking. Like, he's in the hospital. He was just so sick at that time. I mean, materially, just the physical. He's in the hospital and he's observing Ekadashi in the hospital and not taking the IV because he's saying has grains in it.
Yeah, bro.
I mean, look at that standard. We're perfectly healthy, and we will, we'll go and eat something outside, and he's and I mean, these are small things. I mean, his service to Prabhupada, he has 70,000 disciples. His service to Prabhupada is unlimited. Like, his service to Krishna is unlimited, and that's the intensity, right? That's the, I mean, it manifests in these smaller ways, like you're saying, but overall, he's the perfect example of how much compassion he has for fallen souls. I mean, how much he is preaching.
That brings a point from this purport that how he can become a Brahmin, right? So that even at that situation is so strict. I'll share one more thing. He had, because of this liver transplant and kidney transplant a few years ago, something happened in the vein. There is some small correction. It's like a mechanical. Our body is a mechanical tool anyway. So because of one of the defects, there was a bleeding in the abdomen. And what happened was, is almost, we thought it's very serious. Recently happened, like a couple months. And then Maharaj was airlifted all the way from Calcutta to Chennai because they were not able to do anything in Mayapur. They went to Calcutta, and then Finally, they figured out the person who did the transplant, only he has to fix, nobody else can fix. And so they were, Maharaj, that transplant happened in Chennai. So I was airlifted from Calcutta to Chennai. And after that, even coming to the situation of hemoglobin and blood count, etc., they did a lot, but finally he reached, and then the transplant was done. The correction was done. The main vein had some puncture or something, and then that was corrected. And the next day they did another surgery, and they could feel there was 1 liter of clot, and not 1 liter, maybe 4 liters, something like that. That clot was there, the blood inside the abdomen. And then after all these surgeries, he woke up and he said, hey, there is a GBC meeting. Can I attend? Wow. And Maharaj said, you are sick. Maharaj, you are sick. This has just happened. So it just happened for you. Please take care. So he was not in his body consciousness at all. He was thinking about the service of Srila Prabhupada, even at this situation. He didn't even realize that he had a surgery. He said, hey, log into the call. Wow. Can we imagine this? It's mind-boggling. So I don't know. In one way, I'm fortunate. One way, I'm thinking, my God, what do I do? Wow. What am I doing, really? I'm really ashamed to be a disciple of him. I'm thinking like that.
No, yes. No, it's it's the this is the pure devotee, like completely absorbed mind, body, words, and they become, the disciple who is, they become like Prabhupada, they become replicas of Prabhupada, like this is like, who can have this level of absorption other than a pure devotee of the Lord, just who is so, and he knows with so many disciples, 70,000 disciples, he knew that he has to take such a burden, it's like it's a burden of their karma and all these things, and very much this is like his mood is actually mood of Vasudeva Datta, that very much he's taking all of it on his shoulders to make the world Krishna conscious, to make others Krishna conscious. So yeah,
yes, Prabhu. Thank you. Sorry, I'm taking so much time of you as well.
No, thank you. It was such a nice, I took everyone's time. We went way over time, but I think people stayed who wanted to stay. Anyone could, yes.
Yeah.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Please accept my humble thanks. All glories to Guru and Gauranga. Prabhuji, I logged in very late, Prabhuji, because I was doing something else. So I just got to hear the conversation that you and Balram Prabhu were having. Such a wonderful conversation. I had one doubt, typical, so when Guru Maharaj, like Jayapataka Maharaj says, I want to log into the call, in that situation, that his disciple, whoever is serving him, is now in a situation where Guru Agna to log into the call, or look at Guru's body, yes, and don't log into the call. So how does the devotee make a decision in that sort of a situation?
It's really interesting. Just a few days ago, we were talking about this in regards to another situation. And this is in the example of life of Srila Prabhupada also, that when Prabhupada was sick and he wanted to travel and preach, some disciples say, well, Prabhupada said this, so we have to make arrangement for him to travel and preach. And other disciples who equally left Prabhupada, they said, no, Prabhupada cannot go and preach. He's sick. We have to take care of him. We have to stop him from going so he can recover, because it's our duty to care for our spiritual master so he can get healthy, and then he'll be better off in this way. So this is these are all spiritual emotions. These are all this is not a matter of offense. This is a matter of rasa. Like, this is because the desire of the disciple is to please the spiritual master, and one is thinking, I should do it by following his instructions, and others thinking, no, I should do it by caring for him. And ultimately, the disciple will present, like the disciples would do this, they would present their case to the spiritual master that, Prabhupada, you should not travel. You're not well. And some of Prabhupada's closest, most advanced disciples, like Tamal Krishna Maharaj, who was closest to Prabhupada at that time in terms of serving him, he was his personal servant at that time. He was arguing with Prabhupada, but that was out of love and with the knowledge that ultimately still whatever Prabhupada decides, that's what's going to happen. So you'll see sometimes even very advanced devotees, they'll argue with their spiritual master, but the spiritual master accepts it very lovingly, and it's between obviously a very mature disciple and spiritual master, because both of them know that the disciple at the end will carry out the order of the guru. So whatever the final verdict is, that they will surrender to. So at the end, if Prabhupada said, no, I'm going to go, I'm going to travel, then they would go and travel. So that's the mood, that disciples should say, like Balaram Prabhu said to Maharaj, but Maharaj, you're sick, you should not do that. And Maharaj may agree after disciple tells us, like, oh yeah, no, I should take rest, otherwise I'll get more sick. But at the end of the day, the disciple knows that, well, no, if he still insists, I have to follow the instruction.
Gopal, I just wanted to add something here.
Yes.
In that controversy that happened, when Prabhupada was leaving the final pastimes,
Yes.
there was a big controversy, right? There was one group who said Prabhupada should not go to on this trip or on this travel around Govardhan because the Ayurveda doctor said he's going to leave his body. He's so weak. And the others said, no, we should follow his desire. And so in that context, there was it seemed like Prabhupada, the love that Prabhupada, that the devotees had for him seemed like it all outweighs the other part, you see, because we have very good examples in Chaitanya Charitamrita, also when Lord Chaitanya gives him to the loving desires of his devotees versus what is proper and what is not proper. So ultimately that supersedes the other part that, like you said, it's a spiritual emotion, and it's a spiritual emotion, but yet the loving dealings between devotees supersedes the other part. And that is the mood of the Brajvasis and all those mood, the topmost mood that Lord Chaitanya ultimately displays, also many instances. So so the because our process is this loving devotional service to Krishna, and so it outweighs everything. And we see in the life of Prabhupada also many times he gave in to this part, where he showed by example that the loving feelings that his disciples had for him supersedes his instructions, ultimately. I just wanted to point out,
Yes. Yes. Prabhupada gave in to their love, and the disciple, if seeing that the spiritual master wants something, will give in to, will ultimately be surrendered to their instruction. So both ways, it's a relationship, an exchange of love. Yes.
Thank you so much, Mataji, and thank you so much, Prabhu. So like you said, this needs to be looked in a different way, because it may look like an instruction being given and somebody disrespecting it, versus it's a matter of rasa where it's going between the guru and the disciple. So nice, Prabhuji. Thank you so much. And Mataji, thank you so much, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Yes, thank you. Thank you for being so patient and staying for such a long time. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.